Yeager, Chair of the Education Committee. Today, we will be examining breaking testing culture, evaluating multiple pathways to determine student mastery. Before we get started, just want to note we've been joined by Councilmember Kalos, and other members will be filing in shortly. Each year, New York City's Department of Education administers high-stakes standardized tests to students throughout the school system. These exams include grades 3 to 8 state English language arts, ELA, and math tests, grades 4 and 8 science tests, state tests to identify English language learners, are now called multilingual learners, language achievement tests, and alternate assessments for students with disabilities. Additionally, the DOE administers some city tests to students who opt to take such exams, including gifted and talented tests, second language proficiency exams, advanced placement and college entrance exams, including the SAT and ACT. Finally, all New York City students in elementary, middle, and high schools take periodic assessments in multiple subjects several times throughout the school year to give teachers more information about what students have learned. That's a lot of tests, and I'm not even considering tests that teachers create and give students throughout the year, in addition to quizzes. A 2015 study by the Council of the Great City Schools found that the average student in America's big city public school takes approximately 112 mandatory standardized tests between pre-kindergarten and the end of 12th grade. One test that I haven't mentioned yet is the state regents exams that students in New York are required to pass in order to receive a high school diploma. There is growing discontent over the use of such exit exams, as research has shown that exit exams increase dropout rates, particularly among low-income students of color, while not increasing achievement or adult incomes for graduates. As a result, many states have eliminated exit exams, and there are only 11 states with graduation tests in place, down from a high of 27. Recently, the New York State Board of Regents convened a commission to help consider whether to continue use of the Regents' exit exams in New York. Students have multiple intelligences, and the current assessments only capture a fraction of what students can do. We need to follow the research and science on education and tap into accessing and celebrating our students' multiple intelligences. We need to build a system that fully captures our students' abilities and talents. And I'd like to take a moment to welcome our very special guest, the musician and actor and proud Nycc High School graduate, Anthony Ramos. You may know him as one of the stars of the Broadway musical Hamilton. He'll be speaking about his experience, and I want to let him and his wonderful drama teacher and my former colleague, Sarah Steinweiss, to tell their story shortly. But let me just say that our school system did not do everything possible to recognize and celebrate Anthony's talents. And we need to make sure that students in performing arts, music, or other creative endeavors are being not only nurtured in an academic setting, but also celebrated for their extraordinary talents that a single high-stakes test like a Regents simply cannot capture. What's also very troubling is that because there's so much riding on tests, there's been a lot of teaching to the test. That is, focusing instruction on what is on the Regents in other tests and spending less time on what's not on the test. In fact, studies show that across the nation, there has been a narrowing of the curriculum, with many schools reducing the time spent on science, social studies, and the arts in order to focus more time on reading and math, the subjects tested the most. Teachers are well aware of this and often say if it isn't tested, it isn't taught. As a former high school history teacher, I felt disturbed about how much pressure I was under and my colleagues were under to focus strictly on the Regents exam to boost student scores and just to make the system look good. And I often felt frustrated that I couldn't teach in more depth on issues of greater impact on students' lives. Some critics of testing contend that schools are turning into test prep factories, with far too much time spent on preparing for and taking and scoring tests. That's time taken away from other essential subjects, like the arts and physical education, and other activities that really engage students. Parents across the country and city are angered by what they perceive as excessive testing and have launched petitions and boycotts, or have chosen to opt their children out of high-stakes testing altogether. New York State has one of the highest test opt-out rates in the country. Parents and advocates say that excessive testing and test prep robs students and teachers of motivation and joy in school. Further, teaching to the test narrows curriculum and instruction, thereby limiting kids' world rather than expanding their horizon. Instead, they advocate for replacing standardized multiple-choice exams with alternative performance-based assessments that measure how well students apply their knowledge, skills, and abilities to authentic, real-world problems. Examples of performance-based assessments include student portfolios, projects, oral presentations, experiments, exhibitions, and dance, drama, or music performances, among others. In fact, New York Performance Standards Consortium, a network of about 35 schools in New York City, has been using only performance-based assessments in its schools for over 20 years and received a waiver from state requirements in order to do so. The majority of consortium schools outperform the average for traditional DOE schools and have higher graduation rates for students with disabilities and multilingual learners than the citywide numbers. I was fortunate to visit a consortium school recently and was extremely impressed by what I saw. There are very promising results in many areas at these schools, and I wonder who in the DOE is looking at these schools' best practices. Is anyone at DOE sharing these best practices? Are there more schools that want to adopt these methods? These are just some of the questions I have for the DOE later today. Clearly, this is an important topic, and we have a lot to examine today about the use of testing as well as alternative assessments in New York City schools. As a former teacher, I wholeheartedly understand the importance of measuring students' understanding of critical content material. However, I question if relying solely on high-stakes standardized testing is the right answer. For one thing, teaching to the test takes the joy out of teaching for teachers, and I'm concerned that these exams are driving the best teachers out of the classroom. I am also concerned about the mental health of our students and that these exams are causing some to undergo anxiety and have panic attacks. I even heard from one hospital administrator that they can predict when the local schools are administering exams because of ER visits by students that rise sharply on those test days. Equally concerning is the amount of money and time DOE invests in preparing for and administering these high-stakes exams. This money and time could be most effectively spent elsewhere. Today's hearing will provide an opportunity for the administration to address such concerns, among others. It will also provide an opportunity for students, educators, parents, and experts to share their concerns and provide recommendation regarding alternative ways and more effective ways to measure student mastery. I also want to thank everyone who is testifying today. I want to thank the City Council staff for their work, Malcolm Butterhorn, the Committee Counsel, Jan Atwell, Policy Analyst, Kalima Johnson, Policy Analyst, Chelsea Badamore, a Financial Analyst. I want to thank my Chief of Staff, Anna Scaife, and my Policy Director, Vanessa Ogle. We've been joined by Councilmember Lander, Councilmember King, Councilmember Holden, Councilmember Borelli, Councilmember Grodenchik, Councilmember Barron. And before we hear from our star panel, I'd like for the council staff, if they could play for the audience and the public this very powerful YouTube animation from Storybooth about the story of Anthony Ramos.
So I grew up in Bushwick, Brooklyn. I grew up in the projects, a single mom. And, it was funny. My mom used to say to me when I was a kid, I used to sit by the window and say, I don't want to be here anymore. She'd laugh and she'd be like, well, where do you want to be, Papa? And I'd be like, I don't know. I don't know. I had dreams for myself. that I couldn't actually like vocalize. I couldn't say the words. I felt like I was just locked in this box and I needed to be free of this box that I feel like I was in. I always enjoyed singing. I would sing at the family events. I'd sing at Christmas. I'd sing at Thanksgiving. But in my junior year, I went and auditioned for what I thought was a talent show. My director, her name is Sarah Steinweiss. She said, hey, what are you singing for us? I said, I'm singing Ordinary People by John Legend. She's like, okay, go ahead. I sang my song. I'm like, okay, great. Thanks. And she's like, hold on. You haven't done the lines. I said, I'm sorry, miss, I don't do lines. And she's like, what? Do you know what this is? And I'm like, yeah, talent show. She's like, no, it's a musical. I said, whoa, hold up. I ain't signed up to audition for a musical. She's like, well, since you're here, can you do these lines? And I'm like, all right, cool, whatever. So the next day, I was selected to play the character of Zeus. Fast forward, I get on stage. I get this overwhelming feeling that came over me, and I'm like, I couldn't define it. But later on, I realized that it was this sense of joy and this sense of belonging that I hadn't felt in my entire life. You ever seen the movies, like you see the superhero getting their powers, like Spider-Man, like how the spider bit him and all of a sudden he's like spitting webs from his wrists? You know, like, I'm not saying I turned into Spider-Man, but it felt like I became a superhero on stage. Fast forward, I'm ready to apply for colleges, but my grades weren't that good. All of my applications had gotten withdrawn from every single school I applied to because I didn't get my financial aid forms in time. Unfortunately, my family was going through some hard stuff, and we just couldn't get the forms in time. So I had no school to go to. I was doing a community theater show at the time. Sarah Steinweiss, my director in high school, she comes to rehearsal, gave me a pamphlet. She says, you need to audition for this school. I'm like, I can't. This is not a school that a kid like me can afford. I don't really have any actual formal training. She's like, I don't care. We're going to go for it. And I was like, all right, let's go. And I do the audition, and I get the call. I get into the school. I'm like, thank you so much. Fall on my knees, and I'm like praying. I'm like, God, wow, thank you, thank you, thank you. Next thing you know, I get the welcome packet, and then I see the magical page with the numbers. I was going to have to take a loan for more money than I could ever afford. And my reality set in. You're poor from the projects. You didn't get a scholarship. And this is where your dream stops. Then Sarah Steinweiss comes to a rehearsal. She says, hey, I gave your name to the Jerry Seinfeld Scholarship Foundation, and they want to meet you. So I have this meeting with this amazing woman named Kate Fenneman. I said to Kate, I don't need anybody to give me a handout. All I need is someone to give me a shot. If somebody can just give me a shot, I'm going to give it all I got. I'm crying. She's crying. I'm like, all right, peace. I got to go. Kate calls. She says, hey, we want to pay for your school for all 4 years. And immediately my life changed. My mother and I'll never forget, we were in the living room and we both fell to our knees and we both cried because we knew in that moment that was a chance for me to do something that was beyond anything that any of us could have imagined or have ever experienced before. And fast forward, I ended up going to musical theater school. I studied and worked my tail off. I kept going and I worked hard. Today, I can gratefully say that I have lived some dreams out, and I still am, that I could never imagine as a kid. From being in the biggest musical in the history of Broadway in Hamilton to working on a movie that seems to be changing people's lives in A Star is Born, to now starring in The Heights, the movie version, and playing the lead role when I never thought that there'd ever be a lead role for me because there weren't many lead characters that looked like me, that were Latin, who came from where I came from. But I thank God that when you dream big enough, your dreams sometimes become bigger than reality.
I think we could just close the hearing right now. That was powerful. And just want to note, we've also been joined by Councilmember Brennan and Councilmember Lewis. And with that, I'd like to turn the microphone over to Anthony Ramos.
Okay, word. Thanks, man. I feel kind of weird because I have my back to all of you, so hello, everyone back here. and all the folks in front of me, hello, thanks for coming. I'm grateful to be here. Thank you, Sarah Steinwise. That was crazy watching it like that. It's wild. So I didn't write anything down, so here we go. I wasn't a great test taker in high school. I'm not even gonna lie, my grades were not that good. And if it hadn't been for the theater guild, you know, I played baseball and that kept me focused, that kept me coming to school, and I think we should keep sports in schools. I think sports is so important, but I feel that theater programs like the Theater Guild and like peer mediation, where actually two students can sit in the middle of a table and be in between two or more students that have just gotten into some kind of fight or some kind of argument, and just get to the bottom of it between them without any adults involved, but with the training of someone who's experienced in this, can change lives. And I've seen it happen in our school, and both those programs got cut from New Utrecht High School. And it's always about money, right? But we live in the greatest city in the world, and there's so much money in New York, and I feel like we could find the money if we wanted to. And you know, again, my grades weren't that good, but as you saw in that story, usually I tell that story, but thank God you played a video, so I don't have to go through that, telling that story all over again. And I'm just grateful for teachers like Sarah Steinwise, who changed my life and believed in me. I auditioned for performing arts schools like LaGuardia and such, and I didn't get in because of my grades. Had nothing to do with my talent, at least I don't think. But all that to say is, you know, thank God again for people like Kate Fenneman, who I sat across from and who gave me a chance. She saw my grades. I had a C average. Like, it was like, who wants to give a kid with a C average a scholarship? I failed the Earth Science Regents 3 times. I failed that test 3 times, failed biology once, I failed math once. I barely got a Regents diploma. I almost didn't graduate because I failed my Earth Science Regents 3 times. And thank God we found another way, right? And I think all that to say is, tests aren't everything. I wish that the Theater Guild was a part of the curriculum. I wish it was mandatory for me to go to Theater Guild. You wouldn't have to drag me out of bed to do something that I was that passionate about. I wish we spent more time finding those things that kids are passionate about. I know we only get a certain amount of hours allotted in the school day, but I feel like there are a lot of smart people that are assigned in certain positions to help find solutions to these questions. And I feel like if we work just a little harder, we might be able to find a way to bring the best out of students without it falling so hard on their test scores. Because again, I was not a good test taker, but I'm so grateful today that I can sit before you and say that my life isn't so bad. I've been blessed to do some amazing things and work with some amazing people, and live a comfortable life, not because of my test scores, but because of what people saw in me, what another human saw in my eyes, what another human saw in my ability, far beyond a score on a paper. I didn't come here to preach to anybody. I didn't come here to preach to anybody, but I just came here to give you my personal experience. And in my personal experience, if it hadn't been for the Theater Guild, if it hadn't been for the rehearsal being her just seeing beyond the grades, Kate Fenneman seeing beyond the grades and just looking at the human and being like, there's more to him than what I see on this paper, I wouldn't be sitting before you today. I probably wouldn't have the story to tell you. there wouldn't be a story booth cartoon for us to play today. So I just, as a former student of the New York City public school system and New York native, Brooklyn native, I just ask that if we can push a little harder to find ways to keep the funding for these programs and focus less on the testing and more, or let's balance it out maybe, right? Oh, well, this kid is weak in testing, but they're very strong in these extracurriculars, which don't actually have to be extracurriculars. These extracurriculars maybe can become a part of the curriculum. I'm just spitballing, you know, like maybe we can take some of these things that are extracurricular. I don't use math in my life. Only when I add the money I paid for whatever I just bought, if I'm gonna be honest, right? I don't use algebra. But best believe I use the skills she taught me in Theater Guild every day of my life. When I step on a set, the things I learned in peer mediation, how to treat people, conflict resolution, I use that in my life every single day. And I wish I had more of that, but I didn't because, again, we only had so many hours of school and they were filled with history, U.S. history, which even in that class, I didn't learn anything about Latin history. I didn't learn anything about my ancestors in Puerto Rico. I had to look for that on my own as an adult, right? But all that to say is I just hope that we can, because I'm probably running out of time. I was supposed to time myself and I didn't, but all that to say is I hope we can, we as in us, me being the regular person that just lives every day, and you who work here and do this every single day and have, and are, you know, this is what you do. If we can work together to figure out ways to help students find the things that they're truly passionate about and again, hopefully focus less on the A minus or the F that they got on that test. And also put more social workers in schools. Maybe even one can make a difference. Just someone that kids can talk to and say, yo, my life is hard right now. I can't even focus in class, because that was a big reason why I couldn't focus in class, because my life was crazy when I was 17. I was going through some things that a 17-year-old should never go through. And all I needed was just somebody to maybe help me get it off my chest and just tell me it's gonna be okay. And then I'll be like, oh, okay, maybe it is. And then go to my next class and then hopefully, you know, and which it did, it helped me focus. I had a great social worker in school named Jason Jacobs, who is not here right now, but he was another person who was amazing and integral in my graduating. But anyway, all that to say is I hope we can focus less on tests and more on Theater Guild and more on programs like peer mediation and let's maybe get one more social worker in these public schools, because these kids are going through a lot and there's like 35 kids in the class and it's kind of hard to focus on one person talking. There's like 35 kids who are that's 35 different issues happening in all of their heads, and one person trying to deal with that as well as teach something that they probably don't even want to teach because that was just assigned to them because that's the curriculum. But anyway, I'm going on and on. But thank you for listening to me today, and I hope that again, let's just try to bring out the best in the students. And I know I'm just like some person who acts and sings or whatever, and but I'd love to help in any way if anybody cares or is open to thoughts and opinions, because I did go through the New York public school system, and I experienced this, and I did take regents and fail many of them. And but again, life turned out okay, and again, because of teachers like Sarah, because of teachers like Jason Jacobs, who listened to me when I was having a hard time and almost getting evicted, and my dad was on drugs and all sorts of craziness, and he took the time to just, he was hired and paid to sit with students like myself and counsel them through these things, and teachers like Ms. Harm Violette, who was the peer mediation teacher. And if it hadn't been for that, I think I wouldn't have graduated. Baseball was important for sure, but Theater Guild and these other programs were equally, if not more important, in my my growing process and in me graduating and me becoming an adult who has a heart for contributing to society. So again, thank you so much for hearing me out, and I hope that helped a little bit. And have a blessed day. Thanks so much. Sarah Steinweiss.
So we're going to hear from the amazing Miss Steinweiss shortly, but Anthony, there are so many powerful, inspiring stories embedded in what we just heard, but one of the most interesting ironies is for one of the most talented performers to ever hit the Broadway stage, our school system labeled him as underperforming. Think about that. One of the most talented individuals to hit the stage of Broadway was labeled underperforming by our school system. He is an extraordinary talent, and we're grateful to all those supports that were there, in addition to your hard work to help make your success possible. And this council fully hears you and supports you on more social workers in schools as well. With that, I'd like to turn over to the extraordinary Miss Sarah Steinweiss.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to be here. I want to piggyback off of what Anthony said, but share a little bit of my story. I'm also a product of the New York City public school system, born and raised in Brooklyn and still living in Brooklyn. And when I was going through the New York City public school system, my mother was the president of every PTA known to man. She was a force of nature, as they said when I was growing up. And the most pivotal thing in my life happened on February 14th, 1983, when we all came home from school, and my father, who was also a New York City public school teacher, he taught musical education in Bed-Stuy, had a massive heart attack in front of all of us and died. And what I took from that day when my entire life changed was how many of his students showed up at my house that they had to rent buses for his kids to come to my house and to come to his funeral. And that stuck with me. In my house, there was a poem that hung that one of his students wrote about him, about how he's leading the celestial band in heaven. And I knew at that moment, at 5 and 7 years old, when I kept reading that I wanted to finish the job that he started. So I decided then that I wanted to be a teacher. And when I was in the public school system, even though my mom was the president of every PTA and involved in every single thing, I was a kid who struggled. By the time I was in the 5th grade, my uncle, who lived in my house, was arrested and went away to prison for 12 years. And in our household, we had to say that he went to college, but he was in prison. And I wasn't allowed to talk about that because we were a strong, tight family that pushed through. And then I was raised by 2 very strong females who raised 7 kids. And every time I went through school, I was completely lost. Nobody saw me. Least of all, my classmates. And in elementary school, I started to self-harm. The first time I ever cut myself was when I was in the 5th grade, because I was being made fun of so much that I didn't know what to do. And nobody knew that story until I turned 30 and I started sharing that with other kids. And as I moved through elementary school, I never had a connection, and my mom was involved. She was an involved parent, but I was a good liar, because kids who are hurting, kids who have a lot on their plate, we often feel unseen. And if you're in environments like Anthony and I grew up in certain paths, we don't want to bring more to our single mother's plate that they already have. And we know how to survive and get through the day. So when I went to middle school, there was a program called the RAP program, which was led by the social worker who I always say saved my life. And then a school social worker came in and saved my life again, because I met with him on a week-to-week basis. And it built in me knowing that I wanted to be the teacher that sees kids. So when I went to high school, I wasn't that kid that sat and was sulking. I won most popular. I was the president of the school. I was the mayor of the school. I ran every program, but on any given day, if I really thought about my life, I could have ended it. And it wasn't until a teacher ran a theater class in my speech class that I said, maybe I should start a theater program. And I went to my principal as a senior in high school, and I said, I want to start a theater program. There's nothing going on here. And he said, we don't have funding for that. And I said, I'll talk to my friends. We'll get things going. And together, a few of my friends wrote a script, raised some money, begged a few teachers, and the New Utrecht High School Theater Guild was born in 1995 when I was a senior in high school. And that foundation was a platform for me to be seen and heard, and that became my motto as a teacher. My quote that I say all the time that I've said to my kids for years is, I see you. When no one else sees you, I have your back and I see you. And as I started teaching, I first started teaching at Canarsie High School. The first thing that I started at Canarsie High School, and I was only there for 6 short months because I was excessed. The first thing I started at Canarsie, I went to the principal of Canarsie High School and I said, can I start a theater program? Yes, no problem. So I took $50 of my own money and I started a theater program and just got kids together to talk to them. Because what people don't realize is what goes into theater is not just what you come to see on show night. What goes into theater is reading a script, annotating a script, understanding your character, putting together a playbill, doing the research on your characters, figuring out the finances that we have to do and how we fund this. How do we build the sets? Where do we get the money from? Where do we network? We need some lighting. How do we run a lighting board? We need some sound. How do we get sound in here? So when you're doing that, a true theater program is student-led. They have to figure out how to get that money. I look to them to say, how are we doing this today? How are we getting through it? And it was an honor for me to be at New Utrecht for the 13 years that I was there to build this program. But what Anthony said resonates so profoundly because he is the face of thousands of kids that have gone through my classroom. That's what he is. One of my students who was my stage manager, I just want to give you a quick tidbit on her. She was my stage manager for years, and she was the valedictorian. She graduated a few years before Anthony. She was the valedictorian at New Utrecht High School, and she got a full scholarship to Cornell. And it was a big thing for New Utrecht High Schools because we had a child who got a full scholarship to Cornell, and what Cornell looked at was her SAT scores, her Regents exams, the fact that she was the president of the school, she ran she was the captain of the softball team, she ran the theater guild backstage for me. But what Cornell also made her do was, in order for her to accept the scholarship, she had to leave the day of graduation and go sit in a summer program at Cornell with other inner city school children who received scholarships to do a 2-month summer program, or they would have taken her scholarship away because Cornell knew that New York City public school kids were not prepared for an Ivy League education. That's something huge because our kids who are graduating as an English teacher, because that's what I taught, Councilman Traeger spoke about teaching to the test. I got into a little trouble with my AP sometimes because I refused to teach 10th and 11th grade. It was not allowed to be on my program. I wanted freshmen and seniors. The reason for that is because the students in New York City public school systems take their English regents in the 11th grade. So if I'm teaching 10th and 11th grade, I don't get to teach. I have to do test prep from the day they walk into my class to the day they get past that Regents. So as a freshman, I get to teach. I get to teach you how to love literature, how to understand how to critique literature, how to look at characters, how to grow through literature. And as a senior, I get to prepare you for life. I wasn't allowed to do that in the 10th and 11th grade. What I had to do was teach you how to write to a critical lens and put some literary elements and make sure you had 3 of them. But if your punctuation wasn't okay and you didn't have sentences correctly or you didn't write with a capital letter, that's okay. As long as I could figure out what you were saying, you had to pass that Regents. So now we have these students graduating with Regents diplomas, and what we tell them is you are prepared to go out into this world. Yet if you look at the statistics from colleges, most of our students are stuck in remedial classes for 1 to 2 years before they're even allowed to take any of their other classes, because colleges know these kids have been ill-prepared and they don't know how to sit as a college student. So needless to say, in all of this, in going through a lot of this, in 2011, I decided to resign from the Department of Education. Because I wasn't okay with being immoral anymore. I think the Department of Education is a profound system. I think that we do a lot of tremendous, phenomenal work for our kids, but there is a great deal and room and need for improvement. And hearings like this are the beginning of something extremely exciting for someone like me, because it's about time we're talking about looking at alternate ways to assess students. The students that came through the theater program on any given day would come out of class at 3 o'clock and not leave that building until 11 p.m. They did an extra day of school in rehearsal. So when they're rehearsing, they're learning leadership, they're learning perseverance, they're learning commitment, they're learning how to read, they're learning how to take what they read and process it and put it together, how to speak to people, how to be a part of something greater than themselves.
Top of that, try to do homework.
Yes, he's right. And on top of that, I had to give them time to do homework in addition to that, because I would weasel that in some way. And they also learned how to balance schedules, things that we all do every single day that I couldn't teach on any critical lens essay that I taught. But when it came time to graduation, I would sit with the list that I would get from the office of all my kids in theater guilds who were not going to graduate. And I was brought in, because I was always notoriously brought in, because I had kids who I would literally walk to the corner store and say, oh, we're cutting out again today? Come inside, I have something for you to do. I don't sing and dance. Great. Why don't you type the playbill for me? I don't want to do the playbill. Awesome. You want to learn how to do a lighting board? Let's do a lighting board. And giving them skills that are necessary for life. And now when it comes time to graduate, none of those skills matter. I can't comprehend how none of those skills matter. Their time spent when they're not on the street, they're not doing questionable things. I'm not going to say you did questionable things in front of people. They're not doing questionable things that can lead them down other paths, but they're really putting their time and they want to grow and believe in themselves. How do we, as a council, as a Department of Education, as people in the industry, come together to create alternate assessment and pathways? Because I always say this, as an educator, we teach kids how to break down brick walls. That's at least what I believe my job was and is as an educator, because even though I resigned, and then I worked for Councilman Gentili as his educational liaison, and then I left working for Councilman Gentili, and now I own my own business running workshops and trainings for Department of Education schools in helping teachers understand what their job is, teaching kids leadership skills, helping schools grow programs, because I feel like that's where I'll be of best service. But our job is to help kids break down walls. What happens when you teach them to break down that wall, and behind that wall is a cement wall? Now what? So I gave people like Anthony and others this dream of here you go, but now without Kate Fenimore and the Seinfeld Foundation, there really was no other path for us to go, because the truth was, because his grades were so poor, scholarships were not available to him. That was just the end of it. So I constantly had to think out of the box. And I am grateful always that opportunities came my way for my students that led them to their path to greatness. And I think if we all work together, we can make this work this time. We really need to make this work, because if we don't, just teaching to the test, it's proven we're losing a generation. We are losing a complete generation of kids because they don't want to stay in school, they don't want to be there, and I still cannot fathom why in this day and age, theater programs, mediation programs, conflict resolution programs, culinary programs, debate programs, mechanic programs, plumbing programs are not a part of the curriculum. They need to be a part of the curriculum. We talk about choices with, choosing different schools and having the opportunity to go to charter schools. Well, what about a kid's choice to choose what they want to be in life? Where is that choice within our education system? We have the people to do it. You have dedicated people that want to do it. If we bring that all together, you bring a passion back and you bring opportunities for greatness to happen, because he's one of thousands. So I thank you for this opportunity. Like Anthony, I am ready, willing, and able to be on the ground running to help in whatever way I can, to be part of the grander conversations of what works and what can work, because, it only takes one person to start the conversation to get things going. So I thank you all for having me today.
Thank you, Ms. Steinweiss. Ms. Steinweiss and Anthony are used to getting applauses in many rooms. And I'll say this, and my colleagues have some questions, and I'll get to them. Let me be very clear. I challenge any critic of our school system to label this young man underperforming.
Yeah.
I challenge anyone to say that. That's the heart of what we're trying to get at in today's hearing, in today's analysis. Our system is not capturing the fullness of who our students are and their talents and abilities. I'll turn over to my colleagues for questions. Just to note that we're on the clock because I know Anthony's schedule, and also we want to hear from the DOE because we have a lot of questions with DOE as well. We'll begin with Councilmember Kalos.
I want to thank you, Sarah Steinweiss. We need to elevate our teachers who go the extra mile for their students. My Sarah Steinweiss was named Steve Kalin. He taught me how to fix computers. He got me my first job building websites when I was 15, and that skill and talent actually got me paid while I was running for office to this day. So my question to Sarah Steinweiss is, how do we encourage more teachers like you and Stephen Kalin to go that extra mile? How can we facilitate that? How can we support you in all those hours that you put in that you wouldn't otherwise be, that you aren't going to get paid for? And just thank you to Anthony Ramos. I don't know many people who've made it like you, who return calls to their old friends, let alone come testify at the city council. Believe me, I've tried. I also grew up in a household with a single mom, wasn't stable at home, and I find it hard to explain to some of my colleagues here what that's like and why it can be so hard to get those good grades when you might not even have a desk at home to do homework on. And for me, after-school programs were a way of not going home, and they did provide a safe, nurturing environment, and I love the idea of why couldn't we offer kids grades for some of these programs, especially when they have an academic component. But I guess if both of you could just share a little bit.
So to your, how do you support teachers like your teacher and myself? I think overall the number one is to let them know they're appreciated and give them the resources that they need. Most teachers don't go into this for the money. We pretty much know we're not making any money going into this. We go into this because we want to help kids get to where they need to be in life. And when I was at Nycc, the administration continually made it extremely difficult for me to run this program, because as directives came down from the Department of Education that we needed to start going with the Common Core and work to the test, all the money and funding went to everything in that realm or into sports activities. And it was felt that what I did for our kids was not worthy and not important. And I really think at the end of the day, if you see a teacher, you know how I said I see you when no one else sees you, I see you? The same holds true for teachers. Teachers need to be put back on the pedestal that I don't know who took them off of, but they are not the enemy. Teachers are there to do their job. And in order for us to do our job, we need resources. If we don't have the resources to do our job, we talk about equity in education. Equity in education is giving the teachers in all backgrounds, in all areas, the resources they need to provide it for all of their kids. Without that, it makes our job 10 times harder. So to keep teachers like us, to bring teachers like me and some of my colleagues who have left and who are in the system now, it's just do whatever you all can to continue to work with the Department of Education to lift teachers up rather than make them the enemy.
Yeah, I mean, Sarah said it beautifully, but it's support. It's just support, man, and it's not that hard.
No, it's not.
It really isn't. I've seen some amazing things happen for $5,000. We can find money when we need it. And in this case, when it comes to, if a teacher says, I have X amount of students who are thriving in this, but we are on the verge of losing this program, if we don't do X, Y, and Z, I think it is a crime to not go the extra mile to try and help that teacher get what they need to keep that program going. You know, and I think sometimes we just give up because we're like, we just don't have it. Well, work harder. If we got 800 million, we got a wrestling team, we got a swimming team, we got a tennis team, we got a team for everything. Why can't we keep this one theater program here? Why can't we keep this one mediation program? We got 1 million teams and no one goes to the games. What are we doing? Right? And I'm just like, I think it's really about the assistant principals, the principals, the deans. When a teacher comes to you and says, I really feel passionate about this and I think that the kids can succeed and thrive if we do this. We at least owe it to the teachers to listen to them, right? Right? When you all have issues, right? You hope that when you bring these issues to whoever you're bringing them to, that they at least listen. They may not give you what you want, but we hope that we have concerns and we bring them to the people who can solve these problems. We at least hope that they listen because we feel like that is owed to us. So if we do I feel like it's reciprocation, right? Resources. Let me at least hear you. And I can give you the reality. If we don't have the money, I'll tell you to your face, we don't have it. But we can try, right? We'll try. And again, I can't promise you, but we will try. And then we do that and honor our word, right? But I feel like, I just think it's support. Somebody says, I think these students could succeed if we do this, if we keep this, and just hearing them out and listening to them and actually doing what we can and going the extra mile to make that happen for them. Because in turn, that'll only make teachers work harder. Yep. That'll only make teachers want to come to work. I don't know about y'all, but if y'all felt like whoever, again, you're bringing these issues to was actually listening to, wouldn't that make you want to work extra hours? Because we're making progress. We're doing this. So it's about support and just listening and actually doing something about it.
Thank you very much. In interest of time, so we have 2 more members, and we're going to hear from the DOE. I want to next hear from former principal educator, still always an educator, Councilmember Barron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the panel for coming and sharing. And as my colleague stated, there was a teacher that exemplified what you talked about, and for me, that would be Mrs. Ann Yearwood. And she was a teacher without comparison. And it was a program designed by the Department of Education, which at that time was called the Board of Education, which allowed for the arts to be incorporated in the day of instruction. So Mrs. Yearwood, a very talented teacher, would teach us music. I'm talking about music theory and reading notes and keeping rhythms. Wow. She would teach us art because that was her interest, art. We had a kiln in the basement, and the students in the school were allowed to go down and, do their models and put them in the kiln and fire them. Every year we had a musical production. And you talk about the sets, and you talk about costumes, and all of that was supported by, as you mentioned, flexible scheduling and allowing people to get involved and to have a way to express what their talents were. And we know that Garner talks about multiple intelligences. It's not all academic. There is the artistic, the naturalist, the linguist, the musical person, and until the Department of Education finds a way to incorporate all of that in the instructional day, not as a tag-on or add-on, but incorporates that into the instructional day, and until they give teachers the training that's needed. It's not just that you went to school and you got a degree and you came out and now you're ready. No. You may need a mentor. You may need someone who has done that to be able to model for you how to value children, let them know they are important, and that undergirds all that goes on. So I just wanted an opportunity to commend you for what you're doing, to encourage you, and to say that the DOE's got to do better and move away from these high-stakes tests which really don't give us a full measure of what it is that people are able to do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Spoken like a true educator, Councilman Barron. Next, we'll hear from Councilmember Cornegy.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. My Sarah was Steve Sultan, who actually allowed me to be in the jazz band and an audiovisual monitor, as well as being on the basketball team. And this high-stakes testing culture, this is a perfect example of why it should be abolished in its current form. There are so many different measurement tools to determine the capacity and acumen of students that it is really ridiculous, and we are robbing the world of the ability to benefit from the talents and gifts that all students have. Mr. Sultan spent I was the kid who was there till 9, 10, 11 o'clock, based on one of those activities. School was a second home for me. Those hallways have cherished memories for me, whether it was sitting in the hallway having a conversation or talking about a play or the set for the jazz, the new jazz ensemble band, like those memories I'll never forget. So I sit here today before you as a legislator based on having an opportunity to hone all of those other skills. So I thank you for what you're doing. Thank you so much for being here today. I am obviously against high-stake testing as a culture, and just thank you for your voice.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Cornegy. And just to note as well, Nycc High School is in the home district of the big supporter of Nycc High School, Councilmember Justin Brennan. Thank you for being a big supporter of our schools as well. And if any of my colleagues have any additional comments, I want to thank both of you. Anthony, you've chosen to turn your story into a platform to help other students and children. And that, to me, is extraordinarily, so commendable. You're paying it forward. This story has to be shared. There is power in a story, and we have to share this story, as there are many other stories to be shared in the public school system. And Sarah, as you hear, everyone seems to have a Sarah Steinweiss in their life.
Has one.
We need to help support our educators who, in turn, always are there for our students. In your story, Anthony, I heard the story of resilience. I heard the story of class size. I've heard the story of a culturally responsive curriculum. I've heard the story of just giving kids a shot, not a handout, but just a shot. The story of more social workers that are needed in our school system. Many of the things that we are talking about, but we need to act. And so thank you for setting the framework of this hearing and this discussion. I think this is, in lesson plan, this is called the hook, Ms. Steinweiss.
Yes, it is.
We grabbed folks' attention, and we have a lot of work to do. So I want to thank both of you for taking the time out of your extraordinarily busy schedules to help pay it forward for our students and our future generations. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for having us.
Thank you.
Take care.
So I've just been notified that they have concluded the hearing next in the chamber. So in order for us to be a little bit more comfortable, we could actually move into the chamber for some more space. And just to note, the first panel that we'll hear from will be from the DOE, Linda Chen, Aaliyah Brown, and Alan Cheng.